All right, the bar is set high. Let's leave you all inspired. I'm going to do my best. Thank you so much for having me. I wanted to start by defining what a jump is. So, to me, a jump is to take a risk and to leave something comfortable, to chase a passion. Just by a show of hands, has anyone here jumped in some way or the other, career-wise, personal-wise? Wow, all right. So you guys know what I'm talking about. So I want to spend the next 20 minutes, maybe less, try to get out of here, I know lunch is coming up, to talk about why jumping is actually not optional, and also why that actually isn't a bad thing. So in 1971, Richie Ward wrote a book called The Living Clocks, and he said this actually about humans, with nothing to do about technology. In the struggle for survival, the fittest win out at the expense of their rivals because they succeed in adapting themselves best to their environment. Now, I want to share with you two quick stories. Last week, I was in San Francisco meeting with Y Combinator, which is a global tech accelerator. And Y Combinator, as many of you know, receives 8,000 to 10,000 applications a year on startup ideas similar to the ones that we just heard. And the partner who reviews every single one of those applications told me that what he looks for are not the jumps that are nice to have, the technologies that seem cute and fun and maybe would be a good addition to society. Instead, he looks for the entrepreneurs and the technologies that will adapt best to their environment in the next 100 years. It's funny because the next day while I was walking down my neighborhood grabbing a cup of coffee, I heard a car honk, and I looked up, and that's actually not that abnormal. In San Francisco, the drivers are pretty terrible, so people honk all the time. But the car that was honking at an autonomous vehicle in front of it. And I thought that was pretty funny because there's no one in that car. And to me, that almost epitomized what the Y Combinator partner was talking about, and really what this quote's about as well. As humans, we can't continue on with behaviors that might make sense today, but won't have a place in the future. So, leading into the second part here, or the first part rather, I'd like to look at when we haven't adapted, when we haven't tried to be versatile in coming up with where our environment's going. I want to give you two examples. I think you'll know both of them pretty well. First is Blockbuster. Anyone remember Blockbuster? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So in the early 2000s, Blockbuster, which is was, I should say, a VHS rental storefront, had hundreds of locations around the United States. It was approached by the CEO of an upstart called Netflix. This was the year 2000. Netflix basically said to them, hey, we're an online version of what you do. Why don't we partner? Now, Blockbuster actually had a lot of reasons to say no, which is what they did. First and foremost, Blockbuster's business was getting people in the stores. Because if you're like me, not only do you get the VHS tape, but then you end up getting the popcorn, the soda, and about everything else you see when you're checking out. But more importantly, Blockbuster's model for profitability was actually in the late fees associated with the rentals. So they made money because if you're like me, you forget to put down your VHS tape to bring back the next day, and you keep it for a week, maybe two, maybe three. And so the idea of moving to a subscription model, which is what the CEO of Netflix was suggesting, would actually eat into the profitability of Blockbuster. So even though the technology was starting to ramp up in the early 21st century, and they had a partner that was willing to collaborate in getting the delivery from the warehouse to the consumer's door, Blockbuster passed on the opportunity. Now, I think we all know what happened next. Within a decade, Blockbuster was bankrupt. Netflix became a $28 billion company, and the rest, as they say, is history. But it's important to note from this example that Blockbuster wasn't really in the wrong. It just wasn't thinking ahead. It wasn't preparing to jump as technology changed. Another familiar example, Blackberry. Who here, be honest, show of hands, once owned a Blackberry? All right, keep your hands up if you still own a Blackberry. All right, we got one. Okay. That is about, I would say that relates just about to the market share change in Blackberry. We had about 40 hands to 1. Blackberry in 2007 had 20% of the market share for smartphones. They actually pioneered the World Edition. I don't know if that's the one you've got, but that was my personal favorite. And in came Apple. And there were two pieces that Apple took a bet on. Number one, the keyboard went to touchscreen. And number two, the first iPhone was designed for the consumer. And the bet here, and what made Steve Jobs the person that he was that it would be so friendly to consumer that professionals would actually opt into using it, even if they had to pay extra for it. Again, hindsight's 20/20. And BlackBerry wasn't in the wrong for passing on these opportunities. But if they looked into the research and looked into the technology, the answer actually would have been clear. You had to have jumped. And when they did not, again, the proof was within the next 7 years, bankruptcy. Now, I was told to make this an uplifting talk, so we're going to get into the good stuff. Over the last 2 days, you've learned about entrepreneurs and technologies that are taking jumps so that they're not case studies in part 1, but rather leaders of part 2. And I want to share with you 4 examples from 4 different industries: energy, transportation, agriculture, and healthcare, of companies from around the United States who are taking jumps and the entrepreneurs behind them so that they can lead the forefront of innovation. Let's start with Scale Microgrid Solutions. These are depictions of what advanced technologies will look like that will combine renewable and highly efficient natural energy systems that can be delivered affordably, sustainably, and on-site in areas like Puerto Rico, where energy systems are damaged potentially for permanent use because the technology can't meet the demands of today's civilization. Let's hear a quick clip from the founder of Scale Microgrid Solutions, Tim Hague.
Hi, my name is Tim Hague, and I'm a co-founder of Scale Microgrid Solutions. I started Scale because I believe that in the 21st century, having access to electricity is a fundamental human right. Yet, I am also certain that the way we produce most electricity is a primary driver of climate change and is destroying our planet. While I don't know how to reconcile this dichotomy yet, I jumped because I do know that I want to spend the rest of my life trying to figure it out.
Let's move on from energy and go into transportation. Now, this example is a little bit of a cheat because Waze is not its own startup, so I use parentheses, startup. It's a company that was acquired by Google in 2015 for $1.15 billion. You might be thinking, well, Google already has Google Maps. Why would they buy another traffic and data route planning system? But Waze is betting on the future. So Waze is using big data and working with communities and municipalities, including the one in Toulouse and across Western Europe and the rest of the world, to leverage all of the data from traffic, from police stops, and from commuter visits to understand not only how cars will operate today, but how autonomous vehicles will operate tomorrow. Let's hear from the Global Partnerships Director for Waze, Adam Freed.
Hi, my name is Adam Freed, and I look after global partnerships at Waze. Waze is a real-time, crowdsourced traffic and navigation app, and we're powered by the largest community of drivers anywhere in the world. Our vision of Waze is to figure out how we can eliminate traffic altogether. And I jumped to Waze because I thought there's nothing more exciting than figuring out how to spend more time with the people we care about and less time stuck in traffic.
Now, this version of the future AV of Waze is not yet out, but that's their plan. That's the future for Waze. Going into agriculture, there's a Boston-based agriculture tech company that's out of the seed stage called Telus Labs. Telus is using satellite imagery to accurately predict crop yields in a space where crop yields for the last several centuries have been used at best by guess and estimates. Now, the photo on the right shows you real-time data being applied to the United States as forecasts have been combined with the data received from the imagery from the satellites on the right, on the left, excuse me. And Telus believes that this type of technology can be applied not only in machine learning for agriculture, but in a host of other industries as well. For them, food is just the beginning. And let's hear from their founder, David Potier.
Agriculture markets had been relying.
Sorry, start again.
The agriculture markets had been relying on inconsistent weather data and anecdotal information for too long. We saw an opportunity to use satellite imagery and machine learning to build a better solution, one that would more accurately predict crop yields. So I jumped from my job at BCG to found Telus Labs. We're using new tech to solve an old problem, and I think we're onto something special.
Finally, let's wrap up with healthcare. Path is a Santa Barbara, California-based startup that helps healthcare practices generate more leads and improve services using artificial intelligence. They do so by powering a messaging software that replaces pen and paper discussions and over-the-counter conversations. Let's hear from their founder, Jeff Cole.
The way people prefer to communicate today is shifting from phone calls to messaging, but most businesses have not adapted to this shift, especially healthcare practices. We thought we could help, so my college roommate and I jumped from jobs in finance to found PathChat, an intelligent messaging platform that's HIPAA compliant and helps healthcare systems generate more leads and improve patient service. We've processed millions of messages for hundreds of customers, and we're just getting started.
All right. Now, there's many more examples like the ones we heard just earlier today and yesterday, but those are 4 industries that I think you can see are thinking forward and figuring out what the jumps are that has to be made in their space and making them today. So to wrap up, I'd like to ask a question for us all to ponder. What will be remembered from this time in human history? I ask that because if you read the New York Times article that came out last week, there was a shipwreck that was discovered. It was actually first discovered in 1902, but more remains were discovered just the last few weeks. And it was off the coast of an island in Greece. What was particularly interesting around the excavation was the discovery of an Antikythera mechanism. I'm not going to say that too many more times because that's tricky, but the Antikythera mechanism is referred to as the original computer. It was found in the original discovery in 1902, over 100 years ago, and dates back to 150 BC. It was used for a variety of purposes, most notably to predict astronomical positions for the Greeks and later the Romans. And it's a celebrated tech achievement of that point in time and of that civilization. So while I'm watching cars honk at autonomous vehicles with no people in them and talking to entrepreneurs and tech investors around what the next thing is, it made me think, if we're looking forward, let's first look back. 2,000 years ago, this was the staple achievement of a civilization. What's going to be ours? Is it going to be in healthcare? Is it going to be in education, transportation, financial services? What's going to stand out? So I have a podcast that starts in 2 weeks. My first guest is COO of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, and we're going to introduce other folks, both from thought leadership positions as well as from academia, entrepreneurship, and all over the spectrum from different industries and backgrounds. And one of the questions that I want to ask is what will be remembered? Because that got me thinking. And there's only so much that one perspective can share. So if you have an answer to this question, I would invite you to go to this link on our website, share your thoughts, and I'd invite the winning submission or the most creative thought to join me on the podcast and make an appearance in a few weeks. So again, to recap, taking a jump might seem optional now, but don't be in a position where you look back and say, I should have seen it coming. Think forward. Don't be a Blockbuster. Try not to be a Blackberry. Thank you so much for having me.